we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Better Than Not. In this episode, I talk with film director Nicola Rose, known for such movies as Goodbye Petrushka and a recent release, Magnetosphere. We talk quite a bit about Magnetosphere, but in particular, the subject of the film, which is synesthesia, which I find fascinating, as in a recent episode with international artist Kirk Sutherland, who has synesthesia and is very much a part of his art. But in this discussion, Nicola goes through and describes more about what synesthesia is about and how it manifests itself in individuals. I can't wait to see this film, and I hope you will too. Stay tuned and listen as director Nicola Rose describes her work and her new film, Magnetosphere.
Okay.
Hi there, and welcome to Better Than Not, the podcast that aims to capture shifting perspectives and thought-provoking ideas in conversation, which is based loosely on my series, A Changing Frame of Reference, which you can read on the Substack app, and I hope you will, as it might give you some insight into what this podcast is all about. I'm your host, Delgardo, and today I'm excited about this conversation to introduce Nicola Rose. Nicola, how are you?
Good, thank you. How
Thanks
are you?
for joining Better Than Not. Nicola is a filmmaker, a director, and I was going to say in the last couple of years has actually gone into the feature film area of directing. So she has a new movie coming out. She's the director of Goodbye Petrushka, and I'm thrilled to have her on here. So again, welcome, Nicola. This is very, very cool.
Thank you.
Nicola, when you were, do you know when this whole film thing started in your life? Did you have as a youngster, or that you wanted to be a director, or did it come in a very odd way? Do you remember?
Do I remember? I'm not sure I remember. I don't think that I had any earthly idea I wanted to be a director until so much later on. I think there were all sorts of other things. It's funny because when I look back on it, it probably was the most appropriate niche for me
Right.
all that time, but I had no idea. So I was probably the last to figure that out.
Have you always been creative?
Yeah, so as a child, I liked to draw, I liked to write. Later on, I liked to act and sing, and that facet of performing and acting was what I pursued for a number of years. And I wasn't looking into directing until I was, which was kind of by accident. There was a piece or two that I directed when I was in when I was in university, and then later on when I was after I had graduated and was doing things in New York. And at some point, I think it dawned on me that I should try. At some point, I was working as a professional puppeteer, which is actually how I was making money as a performer. That was my way of,
Puppeteer?
yeah, that was my way of earning.
With string puppets, or
No, it was
Henson
like
puppets, kind of like.
they were closer to Henson puppets.
Oh,
They
okay.
were, what they call mouth puppets. And
Wow. That's an
yeah,
interesting beginning.
yeah, it's not the usual recommended route to becoming a director. When let me see, I I was a professional puppeteer. That was how I was making the bulk of my income for 6-7 years, something like that. And at some point, I decided, let's try and make a web series
Oh,
with
okay.
puppets, and let's try and make a web series. And that was the very first thing that I ever made on an absolute shoestring budget. No money whatsoever, no resources whatsoever, no skill whatsoever, you name it. It wasn't there. And that was, I mean, there were some very funny people involved. There
Hmm.
were some very funny people, on camera. They were not necessarily being well served, with what the
Wow.
project actually was, but that was my entry point into all of it. And let me see. After that, I made my first short film and my second short film, and I made ultimately four short films
Wow.
before Goodbye Petrushka emerged as a feature film. And
Wow.
you told me the year
S-
2022,
that's
and
still pretty recent.
yeah. Well, Goodbye Petrushka. Yeah, Goodbye Petrushka was filmed in 2021, released in 2022, and then Magnetosphere, which is the film that I made in Canada.
This is the like the kind of the next big event for you, correct?
Mhm.
This film.
Yeah, and that was made just shot just last year in 2023, and will be released next year, 2025.
So, Patricia, you go, Patricia, Nicola, you go
I was
from
drawn to
you
Petrushka and
go
Magnetosphere.
you go from doing puppetry, so you're kind of already behind the camera in a way, right? In the puppetry, what kind of inspired you to do like shorts? Like, could you like what are some of the titles of the shorts that you've done?
Sure. The first you would be able to see sort of a gradation of less and less puppetry as I go
Okay,
along here. The first short film after that web series which I no longer show anyone,
okay,
for various reasons that would be evident
yes.
if you were faced with it. In 2017, I made my first short film, Creative Block, which I haven't looked at in ages and ages.
Oh
But
wow,
Creative
okay.
Block had to do with a young woman who was a puppeteer who was basically losing her inspiration and losing her
Oh wow.
creativity. And, it wasn't necessarily based on my life. It was actually, I think, quite fantastical and magical and so forth. So that wasn't necessarily the point of it. But it was interesting to sort of use puppetry as a sort of means to tell the story because visually it tends to be very interesting.
Yes, yes. Interesting
It's
from
more
that. So,
interesting
so it wasn't really autobiographical.
there, I think there were elements of that film that were autobiographical.
Okay.
It's just that it was never too strictly autobiographical because there were like magic trains and balloons and sentient balloons and so forth. So, debatable how autobiographical it could be. But yes, to an extent, there, I had dealt with that sensation of losing creativity and losing
Okay.
inspiration, and that was something that inspired me to make up the story. And again, uh, it was a very early attempt to tell a story on camera, and ultimately, that story was what became Goodbye Petrushka, which is not a story of magical realism, but it is a story about a girl who goes from America to France and back again, which is also true of the short Creative Block.
Well, it's interesting because I saw some of it, and it starts with a puppet, like in a way,
Uh,
Goodbye Patricia,
yes, yes, Goodbye Petrushka does start with a puppet.
and so it's kind of interesting to see that connection. So I
Hmm.
did look a little bit on your IMDb, and you also had one Biff and Me.
Hmm. That was a short that was
That's
done.
another short as well.
That was a short that was done just before COVID hit.
Oh wow. Okay. So and that well, I was going to say now when you take a look at so how long did it take you to do Goodbye Patricia?
Uh, Goodbye Petrushka. I started writing. I mean, I think I actually started writing the initial version of what became that script in something like 2013. So it was quite a long
Oh
time
wow,
ago.
that is a long time.
But
Okay.
yeah, but I also didn't work on it consistently between then and when a movie got made. So
Do you
I want
find
to
that
say,
there's like a when you're creating these and starting, like you said, 2013, that there's like a simmering time that goes on, that these need to spend time in your mind developing as you work through life, so to speak, over time?
Yeah, they take their time. They have to sort of stew, and they develop and they evolve and they grow different arms and legs that you don't necessarily expect.
Yes.
Goodbye Petrushka is, as I recall, very different from what that initial short film creative block was. So yeah,
Okay. So now you come into where we are today,
Mhm.
excited about magnetosphere. When did that kind of begin? Like as taken its kernel of idea to grow.
Yeah. So, well, speaking of things that take time to stew, or steep, or whatever food metaphor you want to use, uh, Magnetosphere is actually based on a manuscript, like a book manuscript, sort of, that I wrote when I was about 15 years old.
Oh my
So,
goodness. Okay, that's
yeah, so Magnetosphere had to have sat around for like 18 years or more, I don't know, before I started making it into the film script that ended up becoming the movie
wow.
that got shot uh,
And so
last year.
when you're putting that all together, like how long did it take before you kind of like, okay, now we're go, like we're now, because you did you write the script for this movie?
Yeah, I wrote the script for this movie.
So you're like that writing skill you've had, like you said, since you were a child, and doing all that. When did that, like, now we've got to go, we can go into production?
Um, it is very difficult for me to remember how the timing of that worked out,
I'll bet.
but I want to say that it was probably several months from, starting to run it by my producing partners and saying, "What do you guys think? And do you want to work on this?" And starting to see if actors wanted to work on it and so forth. I want to say that it was within the year of launching that project, and
Okay, so
yeah,
relatively quickly, once you kind of put it together and ready to go, so to speak.
that's my cloudy memory of it. Yeah.
Oh wow. So when you're doing that and when you've got that, when did you kind of get the idea that, like, I have a movie here, like this is something that I want to tell that I can't really put in a short, or like, did that just evolve?
Well, I don't think with Magnetosphere that there was ever any idea that it would be a short. I think that one was always sort of a story that had a certain duration. With some things they kind of start out as shorts and they stay shorts, and they just it's as if they have a short body. They work that way. The beginning, middle, and end
Yes.
are a certain distance apart, and they stay that distance apart. They don't expand as they go. Sometimes the opposite happens. They do expand as they go. I've rarely seen it happen where it starts out really long and then it condenses, although I think that can
Interesting.
happen where things get closer together. Um,
Because I think of it kind of like stories, like describing like a short story versus like a long novel. It's an energy to me that
yeah,
I once heard it described. I don't know whether you're familiar with the author Sebastian Unger, who wrote The Perfect Storm and
no.
like the movie. And it
Okay.
started as a short story. And in an interview, I heard him talk about it as, yeah, I couldn't contain it in a short story. And that's kind of what you've described already with your short versus your long film. It's kind of neat. So
Yeah.
when you moved to that, was that like just kind of a natural, like organic growth? Or like you said, Magnetosphere just started, it was kind of a feature kind of from the beginning. Will you
Yeah,
continue
because
to
there
go
was.
in that world now?
Sorry, say that again.
Will you continue to go in that world of feature film now that you see that, like, is that just kind of how you'll put it together, you think?
It all depends on the projects that come up,
Ah,
because
okay.
it's totally possible that another project could rear its head that just kind of wants to be a short film, or something, I suppose, I'm not predicting this, but something could pop up that wants to be episodic, that, kind of
Okay.
asks for more episodic or something like that. So there are all sorts of possibilities. And very hard to predict. Features are so damned expensive and
Mm,
so damn
mm.
complicated and require so many moving parts, just beyond what I can even fathom. And that's even the smallest feature, the least complicated feature, which makes me want to say I don't know that I'll necessarily go immediately to another one of those. I might
Interesting. Interesting.
purposely not go to another, but I don't know. I don't know what will arrive at the finish line next, if that makes sense.
I've heard that to make a movie, um, it's almost a miracle. Like to see it like from beginning and to come through. Could you describe your experience kind of like that? Like it's even maybe mixing what your experiences were like between Goodbye Petrushka and now Magnetosphere.
Oh, what my experiences were like what my experiences were like making them, like how it
Yeah,
how it evolved from making one feature film to make the
you
next.
kind of went from like you said a short and then into this feature film like with Goodbye Petrushka.
Yes,
And
that's
like
correct.
are you a person that's able to plan and strategize and put this all together, or is this like I now want to just film and shoot?
Oh, you have to, I mean, perhaps this is different for other people, but I think you have to plan and organize everything pretty meticulously from A to Z, because otherwise you basically you're running the risk that everything is going to explode,
Right,
and
right.
pretty much first thing on day one. And that could possibly be true even if you do organize everything. So, let alone if you don't. Um,
was
so yeah, I think it is pretty necessary.
was it what you like? So when we the first question I asked you about becoming a director and not being like something that you kind of thought you would be, you've now that you've now done it. Like to me, now you've got Magnetosphere coming out. There's a lot of excitement kind of geared up with that. How does that feel in your sensory sense about like the whole process?
I'm looking forward to it because, films being released always means you're going to see how that film connects with an audience. And it really, to me, isn't a film until it does connect with an audience.
Ah,
So,
okay,
know,
interesting.
uh, yeah, up until then, it's just something that exists on a screen, or something that exists on your computer, or something that exists on your phone. It's sort of one-sided. It's like a one-sided conversation, and it really isn't a full entity until it's a two-sided thing. So
Right,
the audience makes all the difference in the world.
for sure. Did was there something like very interesting in how you like what inspired this story?
So the story got inspired twice because you remember I mentioned it was something I wrote when I was a kid, and
Yeah.
yeah. So when I was a kid, the story was pretty. There was not a lot to distinguish it. It was pretty much just there was a girl and she was growing up, and she had parents, and she had family and so forth, and first love, and there was not a lot beyond sort of the bare bones of that story.
Okay.
So what inspired that, I actually am not sure. I think I'd just been watching like coming of age movies and reading those kinds of books, and you know, uh, they inspired me to put something down on paper, and I was pretty young, so what I put down on paper was pretty, pretty bare bones. Later on, I was interested after coming off of having done Goodbye Petrushka. So Goodbye Petrushka and the short Creative Block. Now that I think about it, those two movies are the only two of the six films that I've made. I think it's six films now. I would have to double check, but of the six films that I think I've made,
Yes.
um, those are the only two that do not have to do with children. And by children, I mean like adolescents, like up to 16 years old, like not little children, but
Yes.
there's a sort of wedge of age that interests me that's roughly between like 10 and 16. And
Okay.
um, that, I find interesting to tell or consume stories about, because they're right in that period of changing so much. And,
Yes.
becoming the people they're going to be, and also staying the people they always were, and how does that affect the rest of their lives and so forth. Um,
Well, in many
when I
ways, they're very hard years as a
right,
like a young teenager, right? You're trying to figure
oh
out
right,
so much, and your body's changing, and it's just like it's a very to me it's one of the most challenging times of your life.
that's
And
part of what makes it so interesting. It's the
yes,
awkwardness. It's the discomfort. It's the cinema of discomfort, is what it is.
I like that. I like how you said that. Cinema of discomfort, because it's one of those things that almost you're trying to fit in, and everyone else is trying to fit in, and
Yeah,
in trying
and
to
none of
do
you
that,
fit in.
it's very. I'm smiling at this because I just think back to teenage years, and it's
Mhm.
like it's just such a difficult time in your life, and you're trying to grow up at the same time you're not ready to grow up, and you want to be independent yet you're not
You're not
kind of.
ready to. Yeah,
So that's
yeah.
a very fascinating part of what you like to tell stories about.
Right. So far, that's what I've been mainly interested in telling stories about. And Magnetosphere was always a story about a girl who was sort of at that most vulnerable and awkward and
Ah,
strange in between place of that wedge of age, like I said a little while ago, being 13 years old. So she's, in at the moment of the most discomfort of all.
yes.
Um, and uh, I think oh yeah, this is what I was like. What was I saying 100 years ago, 2 minutes ago? After having come off of making Goodbye Petrushka in 2022, I was sort of bereft the way you are when you come off a project and
Right.
missing it and not knowing what to do next and not knowing what I would do next or if I would do another film and so forth and so on. And because there are so many factors in that you don't really have any say over, you don't really get to choose. And I was really interested. I should say really in a vague way interested in doing a story about a child with some sort of extraordinary ability or circumstance. And
Okay.
um, right around that time, I had seen a movie which is a really terrific little indie feature. I say little not to demean it, but to say
No.
it is a little feature, which is an incredible accomplishment to make a little feature. You know this.
Yes, it's
Um,
kind of like the Mark Twain thing of if I had more time, I'd have written you a shorter letter.
yeah, actually, it kind of is. It's the hardest thing in the world to make a small
Oh
film.
my goodness. Yes.
And so this film, I think this is accurate, a Chinese American film, which is called Confetti, and the director is Anne Hu, and
Oh,
it has to do with a young girl who has dyslexia, and I had just seen she moves from China to the United States with her mother to get a different education, and because basically, like in China, they're not educating her with the dyslexia she has, and
mm,
that's the crux of you know the um, the crux of the story why she moves, and it has to do with her assimilating into the U.S. and so forth. And I watched this film, and I was really struck by how the camera work was done.
ah,
How the camera work was done in that she was so often seeing something in a way that nobody else saw it. Like she would see Chinese characters on the wall, on the blackboard in her school, and the characters would like flip around, and you would realize, oh, that's how because she has dyslexia. This is how she's seeing this thing on the wall. She's seeing it in a way that nobody else is seeing it. But the camera shot, the POV shot was, it was being shot from such an angle that we were privy to what was inside her mind and what was
cool.
going on
Yes.
neurologically. Yeah, exactly. And I was really impressed by that. And I I was on a long car ride with my significant other at the time, and we were talking about that movie, and I was saying, oh, it would be so cool to do something about a kid with a sort of extraordinary. Not that dyslexia is an extraordinary ability; it's not an
Right.
ability, but I think I used the word I did not use the word availability. I used the word ability.
Yes.
I said it would be cool to do a film about a kid with an unusual or extraordinary ability or circumstance, like dyslexia, or like
Hmm.
this or that, or like, and he said, not out of the blue, but based on a conversation we had had at some previous moment, he said, "Well, what about synesthesia?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I did, I do remember talking to you about that." And that's true. I had talked to him about that because,
Amazing.
synesthesia is the most, if you're talking about different neurodivergences, like different ways in which people can be neurodivergent, like dyslexia or like ADHD or like
Yes.
autism or like this or that or the other. Here's this: synesthesia is the most obvious gimme of a choice for something to depict on screen, because it's not always visual or auditory, but it can be both visual and auditory in such an interesting way. And it is incredible to me that this has not been done on screen more often.
So,
Like,
Nicola, I'm interrupting you here a bit, but it's
please,
so stunning when you bring this up because I'll say
thank you.
recently I interviewed an artist who has synesthesia. His name's Kirk Sutherland out of Canada, Toronto, and I'd never heard of it before. And now, like, this is the third time, like, in recent weeks, I've heard of this thing. So I'm so excited about this movie to learn how you presented it to your point on screen. Like, it's anyway. I interrupted you. Keep going of how it came about.
Uh, it's okay that you interrupted me because I remember so little of how it came about. But
I have shivers like right now. Like it's just such a weird thing that this has kind of come up so many times now recently.
well, I'm kind of astounded for the opposite reason, which is that I would think that this would have been depicted
More.
so many more times before I ever got to it. And the fact that I seem to be, I'm definitely not the first person to depict synesthesia on screen, but I'm one of the very first.
Oh,
And you know,
I've talked to people about this recently. No one's ever heard of this that I've been connected with. Like this is so what is
well,
so fascinating.
a lot of people haven't heard of it, but it depends who you talk to, because
I'll bet.
as a condition, it's actually pretty common. Some people say it's as many as like 1 in 250 people, something like
Oh
that.
wow.
So
Okay. Okay.
means that it's, but also there are a lot of people who don't know they have it, who go through their whole lives, not having any clue, um, what this is that they're experiencing or anything like that. So,
Well, this is how
because,
this is how this artist described it to me. He thought he was going insane. Like he
oh,
said
did
like
he?
he didn't know what it was. Like
Oh,
he had it and he learned about it I think in his mid 20s.
oh yeah, it took a while.
And now like an abstract, it's probably not the right term for it, but that's the kind of art that he does, and color is amazing to me that he achieves. So this is why this is so very interesting to me.
You know, you just never know how it's going to manifest in people either, because there are people who have grapheme to color synesthesia, or is what they call grapheme to color, meaning like letters to color or words to color or symbols to color. There are people who have synesthesia that might have to do with like taste or
Mhm.
smell, and
Yes, yes.
obviously that stuff is a little harder to depict on screen. Not that you can't do it, but probably a little harder pressed to do it. I did not try. You know, it's something that it's astounding to me hasn't been depicted more often, but I think it's just because so few people realize it's even going on.
Right.
I think I think it's so much a part of so many people's sort of everyday woodwork. Uh, I don't think that they're necessarily realizing that it's happening.
Hmm.
Um, and therefore I don't think people are going around thinking, oh, I'm experiencing this incredible thing that other people don't experience. Well, no, they don't know. They don't know that other people don't
Right.
experience it. Um, so it was something that I was very interested in depicting. I thought it was fascinating. I wanted to get my hands on everything I could read about it. I wanted to talk to all the people with synesthesia I could, and that was just so that I could be sure to depict it as authentically as possible under the circumstances. Because let's face it, last thing you want to do is
Yes.
depict it wrong or totally from imagination. Um, and oh yeah, so this is where a curious thing happened. I always forget this part of the story, which is that I interviewed quite a handful of people as I was getting this thing together, just to make sure that I was on the right track, which fortunately I pretty much was, and how I was depicting synesthesia and the experience of it this little girl was having. And one of the people that I interviewed about synesthesia, about having synesthesia, they call them synesthetes. Um,
Oh,
yeah, synesthetes was a composer. There's a lot of artistic people. Just seems to coincide a lot. Um, there is a composer named Michael Torkey who lives in New York, and I had lunch with him, and I was talking to him about a suite of music that he had written for the New York City Ballet, um, which each movement was inspired by or evoked, I guess, for him a certain color. And he
oh,
was saying something. He was saying something about the instrumentation, and how that enhance the colors of the movement in a certain way, like, oh well, this movement is green, and it was this is not the specific thing he said, but we'll say it was, because he's so he was saying something about, like, oh, this movement was green, and it became all the more green because we were using French horns, so that made it more green, or whatever, because that instrument was more green. And
interesting.
when he said the thing he said about instrumentation and color, that all of a sudden started to evoke a memory for me that I really had not had in a very long time. And I don't know that it ever would have come back again, except for this thing being said. It just happened to have been said. Um, and it was a memory of listening to, I had this cassette tape when I had to have been 4 or 5 years old. Uh, Classical music. I called it the composer tape because my father had written the names of all the composers of
Oh,
the
okay.
different pieces.
Cool.
So I said it was the composer tape, and the composer tape on the B side of the composer tape, it had a piece by Frederick Delius, which is called the Florida Suite, and there there was something that went on that I would never have remembered if not for this thing this guy was saying about instrumentation and color. But I suddenly remembered that piece, not other pieces apparently, but that piece would play for me back in the day in green and orange and blue, and I was like, oh,
I get
because
it.
yeah, I get what I realized I actually am relatively selfish with my interest in this. It wasn't just a curious interest out of nowhere. I
Oh, cool.
thought it was. Turned out it did actually have to do with something, tangentially in my life. I don't remember. See, this is the thing. You don't necessarily know whether you've
Yes.
experienced
Yes.
what this phenomenon, but as far as I know, I hadn't experienced it before or since. Probably did experience it before, because most people do experience this as very small children. I think everybody does as very small children, is kind of the going theory.
Yes. Interesting.
But yeah, I realized, oh, okay, so this is good. This is good that I actually experienced this thing, because it means I'm not such a liar. Um, and so I felt a lot better having at least something to hang it on. I could say, okay, well, I did experience this,
I get
and
this. Okay.
not just not just making it up. Now, did that mean I didn't have to do my research and so
No.
forth? I would have loved to get away with that, but no. Still had to do what I had to do.
Well, when you say that, Nicola, it's interesting because I recently saw a concert pianist. Her name was Laura Altamiller. She played a number of pieces that she'd interpreted. They were just wonderful, but it's one of the first times I ever remember sitting in an audience. And I don't know whether my eyes were closed or not, but it took me into a complete scene of like being on a connected to like a parachute or a sail. and floating over the water and then coming down and having my feet touch the water and then go back up to the sky. And it
Hmm.
was like through her music that she was playing, which
Hmm.
was stunning to say the least. But it was one, I don't ever remember having that kind of an experience. It's not color, but like this almost dreamscape that appears like literally before my eyes while this music is playing. So it's very intriguing how you brought that together and started to bring this into this whole idea of your film. Like I think that's kind of a neat thing.
I'm curious, do you remember what she was playing?
Um, she was very excited. Part of it was Chopin,
Hmm.
but there were two relatively unknown names that I knew. I actually had her on the podcast, and
Okay.
she had talked about when she was 14 how Brahms had come into her life and just changed her whole life, and how she began to be able to interpret it. Like she was already quite a gifted pianist, and that's what took her away. And I was going to say maybe after I can probably look it up and send it to you because it was like it was stunning. Like what
Yeah,
I
I was
began
curious.
became intrigued by the interpretation that another artist does by a composer's work. And it was just I haven't had that experience before. So it was like when you're describing this as a child and hearing this piece of music and these colors, I'm kind of thinking like it has very interesting effects on our bodies, like that are not necessarily just, shall we say, emotional, because I know
Right.
like music really touches us in an emotional way, speaks to us in that way. So
But there's something more sensorial that's
oh
going on.
yes, oh yes. And that's so where did the title, if you not to give, I don't want to give anything away with your movie obviously, but with
Right.
where did the title come from?
I don't think I'm giving away anything too. I mean, I kind of have to answer the question now that it's been asked, but I, I don't think I'm giving away anything that
I
anybody
think
is
it's
going to.
such a cool title for a film. That's the part that I
Thank you.
like. It's like it just kind of jumps right out at you to me.
Which makes me glad that my producer said to me, "Well, we could just use the title magnetosphere because this word comes up in
Ah,
the
okay.
in the script." And I was uh, shying away from the idea of using it because I just thought this is a really ugly and clunky title, and I don't want to use it. But I ended up so it went. Uh, the main character is Maggie, um,
Okay.
who who you remember or I don't know if you remember, I mentioned a little while ago she has her first love. She's 13 years old
Yes.
and falls in love first time she falls in love. And the character she falls in love with is a guy who's much too old for her because she's 13. She doesn't know.
Right.
Um, and he's a graduate student of astronomy. And so he nicknames her Magnetosphere.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
that's very cool.
Yeah. I don't think it's too much of a spoiler because I don't think there's actually anything else much that comes out of it. He calls her a lot of other stuff too that starts with Meg.
Well, the
But
reason why
that's
I was intrigued by it is I thought it had a connection to possibly synesthesia. Like
I don't
that
think
was,
so.
and I said like, oh, that's kind of neat how because it like when it says like I think of magnets and magnets and then the
Oh,
sphere right
right.
like of the Earth and it just prompts like a whole lot of different thoughts that kind of oh wow we got to
Mhm.
check what this is about.
The magnetic field around a planet or other
Yes,
body. Yeah.
so that
Yeah. Around
that
the sun.
is it's very cool. So I'm so intrigued with this process, Nicola, because it's like so I'm going to go to the idea of even like casting
Mhm.
because I'm blown away by how often a movie is cast and
Mhm.
you know the personality almost of that character just purely by looking at them instantly.
Looking at the actor, or are
Yes,
you talking
you
about?
look
Yeah.
looking at the actor and the character they're portraying, you don't even need them to say anything, and you almost know like whether they're good or bad, so to speak, or like and I'm
Whether they work for the, yeah.
and how for your
I mean, whether they're
movie.
bad, you pretty much know.
Yeah, it's just such an interesting, and often they'll be cast in a way that it leads you to question that in a way, right? And that's why I think of like how you went through that process in creating Magnetosphere. Like, was casting, is it a challenge? Do you spend a lot of time at it? And the
Uh,
characters that you have in your head and matching them with like real people.
um, so you have a few different scenarios that can take place, and kind of all of them occurred with Magnetosphere. In some cases, I had written something down and knew I would like X actor for X part if this is possible. And if not possible, then it's going to be somebody else. And I guess we cross this bridge when we come to it. I was very lucky because absolutely everybody I wanted said yes, which I
Oh
did
wow.
not foresee. The
That's
last
pretty
thing I
cool.
thought, yeah, that was pretty much last thing I'm used to. Last thing I foresaw happening. So that was, kind of out of nowhere. Uh, However, there was another scenario which took place as well, which is there were several characters who, majority of characters actually, who were children or teenagers, which meant that I did not know any actors for these characters. Um,
Okay.
Especially in Ontario or in Canada, where where I don't live and where I don't generally work. And so what I found myself needing to do was dip into the pool of talent that exists in Toronto and in the GTA and in other areas, sometimes in northern Ontario where we were filming and so forth, and to try to cast people out of those places. And that was a really painstaking process because, you have to get it right, or at very least you have to try.
Right, right.
You might fail, but fortunately, and there was no failure anywhere. Everybody was right. In fact, the problem, if anything, was that there were too many choices that would have been just right for just about
Wow.
every character that there was. There could have been like five or six people that would have been exactly right,
Oh wow.
and you it's kind of heartbreaking because you can't choose these people, and people so often, people on the acting end of things, they don't realize that it's not them. It's not that something is wrong with them. It's that you can only pick one person, and
Yes.
you just kind of have to go with your gut, and your gut does what it does, and
So that's
you
a
know
big part of it, is your intuition though, like this is the right person kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
Or in
interesting.
some cases, it's not even this is the right person, but these two people together are the right people, or
Okay. There's a lot of kind of complexity that goes into selection.
there's shades of complexity also that have to do with things like this person would be just the right person, but they don't fit into the family that's built around them, or
Okay.
this would be right for the little sister, but she's a different race from the her older sister, and it is going to be noticeable and not explained, and there's no place really to explain an adoption. And had that come up, because I remember having that conversation with my team, like, what if that does come up? What if there is somebody who's a different race and you really want them in the family, something like that? And I think honestly that could have been explained, but it also wasn't an important part of the story, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Oh yeah, no, because to me it's one of those things that has become really like I've kind of learned this in many ways. Is it's not part of the narrative. It's not part of what the film is, even though it's interesting. Or it can
Right.
work the other way. It's interesting yet not part of the narrative, but it needs to stay with the movie. Like it's such a
Right.
it kind of and this is the kind of this is the chair you sit in, right? Like you're figuring those things out. And as you said early on about not necessarily ever thinking that you were going to be a film director,
Mm-hmm.
all those duties, all those responsibilities, all of those things now fit with you, and and
They
and
do.
and you sound like you're quite enthused by the whole process now. You want to do
Well,
more.
yeah. You always need a large break in between projects, so I'm not quite there yet, but uh, the fullness of time. It is a fascinating process because you're dealing with something that is so multifactorial, and you can never quite say why things go right or wrong.
Right.
Um, but it's always just kind of mind blowing to watch it go right, or wrong for that matter. Um, you never entirely know why, and you're just always working on getting better at your job so that it goes better.
You when you're in this mode, like, are there things that you find odd that you didn't expect? Like, for example, when you get the right take, do you just know it?
Uh, Generally,
You do,
yeah,
eh?
generally.
Did you
Uh,
find that in like a surprise, or did you kind of like, I think I've got this figured out. Like, how did some of those things come as surprises to you that I can do this?
Not on doing Magnetosphere, because doing the short films had pretty much prepared me to
Oh, okay.
know that usually the third or fourth take in is going to be. Sometimes it's the first take in. That's pretty rare. Sometimes it's it depends. But they were a very good sort of boot camp for teaching me what to do.
No, that's
Teaching
that's
me
very
what
cool.
to.
So
Yeah,
I was going to say, unfortunately, we're a little short of time here for this. So I really want to have you back on again. So hopefully we'll have that. Is there anything that you would like to kind of like, I'll say, share with a person who is thinking about filmmaking, or like just like maybe words that you'd like to close with before before we wrap it up?
I would say find a story that you really want to tell, something that you would really want to watch, something that you would really want to see on screen, and try making that story, and know that it will probably not come out anything like what you had envisioned, and that is okay. That's if it's the first one you're making, or for that matter, if it's the sixth one you're making, they're going to, with each project, they're going to diverge less and less and less from what you imagined. But the thing is to have in mind what you want it to look like,
Yes.
and
Stay true
um,
to that.
to stay as true as you can. See how close you can get.
No, that's very good. So, a couple things you have. So, from a promotion part, you've got Magnetosphere coming out
Hmm?
now. It's going to premiere in December.
Yeah, it's going to premiere. It did premiere. It did
I,
premiere in Canada in October,
yes, yes,
at the Hamilton Film Festival, and now it will premiere in December at the Dances with Films Festival in New York City on December 8th, and it will have a couple other screenings in the States not too long after that, and it has another screening in Canada, actually
yes.
very very soon, within the next week, at the Sault Ste. Marie Film Festival.
Oh,
Sault Ste.
cool.
Marie, yeah, the movie was shot in the Sioux, so that I think I said
Yes,
something
you
earlier
did. Yeah,
about
at the beginning.
Ontario, casting out of Northern Ontario, yeah,
No,
and
that's
so
very cool.
that's why that
If
came up.
someone wants to find out more about you, do you have a website? Like, I know you're on Nicola Rose IMDb. Do you have a website?
Yep, that's true that I'm on IMDb under Nicola Rose, and my website is nicolaRoseDirects.com.
Cool. No, that's wonderful. I was going to say, I'm sorry that we don't have a lot of time here today, but I was going to say, I'm excited to have you on again, and hopefully you'll be able, after Magnetosphere has a more its grander release, we'll maybe have you back on to talk a little bit more of what you're going to be planning to do.
That would be great. I'd love to update you.
Nicola, if you could just stay on for a minute after we say goodbye, I thank you very much for joining us at this podcast, and I look forward to having Nicola Rose on again and going out to see her new movie, Magnetosphere. I think you're going to be very, very excited to see this. So, anyway, thanks for joining us at Better Than Not, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now. Are we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not.